Meanwhile, in the country of nobles called Lucadonia, the current lord of the nobles, Rascrea, holds a meeting to inform other noble clan leaders about Jejudal's departure to Japan. Some nobles point out that Regis and Sarah, who were tasked with the casket's retrieval, have been silent for a while. This leads them to believe that they are intentionally silent as they are possibly colluding with the noblesse, Rai, who many believed was a traitor since he supposedly betrayed the previous lord, who was also the current lord, Rascrea's father. After the meeting, Carius believes that the speculations about Regis and Sarah are overly presumptuous, whereas Rajak is still open to the possibility of betrayal. Rail, Rajak's younger brother, overhears Sarah's name in the conversation and pipes in. Rajak, being the current leader of the Kersha clan, reminds his brother of his low status and proceeds to ignore him. Meanwhile, at Frank's mansion, Jejudal meets Rai and reveals that since eternal sleep was synonymous with death, many believed Rai to be a traitor for leading the previous lord to his death even though he was on an eternal sleep, since many other noble clan leaders also entered eternal sleep with the previous lord. The gap between the previous nobles and the current nobles was huge since the gaps were filled in desperately, which left Lucadonia, the country of nobles, quite vulnerable. To regain its lost strength, Jejudal invites Rai to return to Lucadonia as he promised to prove his innocence if he was willing to follow him to Lucadonia. Grown close to humans, Rai decides to linger around his high school for a bit longer and tells Jejudal to wait for a while. Meanwhile, Regis and Sarah explain everything about clan leaders and nobility to M21, Tao and Takio since they were superhumans and knew nothing about the nobles. Sarah reveals that she was the leader of the Loyard clan. Furthermore, Regis reveals that Jejudal was his grandfather, which was apparent by the similar patch of black hair in between their white hair. Meanwhile, at Frank's mansion, since Rai was going to stay for a bit longer, Jejudal decides to stay at Frank's mansion, and instead of thanking Frank for his hospitality, Jejudal bluntly tells Frank that he doesn't trust him since Frank was a noble killer 820 years ago and was involved in slaughtering hundreds of nobles. Reminded of his past, Frank gets a flashback of his brutal ways of killing nobles 820 years ago. Since humans were looked down upon by nobles, Frank used to kill nobles in an attempt to make the nobles feel the same way humans did, thus he gained the title of Noble Hunter. Following the events of 820 years ago, to get rid of the arising Noble Hunter, the previous lord had assigned Jejudal and Ragar, the leader of the Kersha clan at the time, to apprehend Frank alive. After receiving the lord's command, on a quiet night, Jejudal and Ragar, along with the Order of the Knights, consisting of noble agents, storm into Frank's residence. Frank, knowing that his hideout was compromised, started to flee, but shortly after, he gets cornered by a cliff. With nowhere to run, Frank unleashed his powers and knocked the army of men instantly. As Frank was done with the agents, Jejudal and Ragar immediately followed up and prevented Frank from escaping. Frank, in no mood to cooperate, immediately starts a fight with Ragar. After a while, Ragar tells Jejudal to stand back as he unsheathed Kardas, his soul weapon, which is a supernatural weapon that can be freely summoned by the noble clan leaders and the lord. Upon seeing Ragar unsheath his soul weapon, Frank summons clouds all over the sky which start to produce purple electricity. The purple electricity strikes Frank's hand and in an instant summons him Dark Spear, his weapon. Frank, after touching swords with Ragar, starts to lose control over his body as the Dark Spear starts to corrupt his soul. Jejudal, sensing that the situation had escalated, decides to discard his honor as he joins to help Ragar 2v1ing against Frank. To end the battle, Jejudal also unsheathes his soul weapon and they all strike at once, causing a huge blast to occur. As the smoke due to the blast died down, Frank had already disappeared with blood trails revealing where he was headed to. Frank, bleeding from his stomach, entered an abandoned and quiet mansion, believing no one would be present inside. After a while, Frank is surprised to see a mysterious man in a dark room, who kept looking out of the window. Unbeknownst to him, it was Rai, who would soon become his master. Mistaking Rai for another servant, Frank believes Rai is a new butler at the mansion. Jejudal and Ragar notify Rai of the Lord's request to see Frank. Rai officially makes Frank his servant, astonishingly turning away noble clan leaders. And meanwhile, Frank continues intense training under Ragar's supervision. But Jejudal remains adamant about apprehending Frank for tarnishing Rai's name. Frank, obedient to Rai, heads to meet the Lord, but he senses hatred from nobles as he makes his way to the throne room. The Lord reveals Rai's isolation and suggests a blood pact with Frank to increase his lifespan. Frank, hesitant to serve nobles, is reminded of his half-decade with Rai. The Lord views Rai as essential for the nobility's protection. However, Frank mocks the Lord's views, suggesting abolishing the system. Intrigued, the Lord leaves Rai in Frank's care. After the meeting, nobles gossip about the Lord's suggestion of a blood pact between Rai and Frank. Uruk-hai grows visibly angry. Later, while carrying out chores, Frank invites Jejidal to spar. Uruk-hai, angered by Frank's acceptance by Rai, duels him. Frank restrains his power, but Uruk-hai provokes him, leading to Frank manifesting a demonic form. Rai and the Lord arrive, and Rai uses their blood to bring Frank back to his senses. Frank, bandaged and back at Rai's mansion, decides to form a blood contract with Rai. Both agree to the pact, and Frank vows loyalty. In the present, Jejidal regrets allowing the contract. He tries to convince Frank to bring Rai back to Lucadonia to prove his innocence, but Frank refuses, highlighting Rai's positive change. Jejidal realizes Rai is content and departs, meeting Regis and Sarah. Returning to Lucadonia, Jejidal informs Raskrea that Rai's friends mistook someone else for him. Doubting his words, Raskrea attempts to read Jejidal's mind, leading to his imprisonment. Rail offers to retrieve Sarah, and Raskrea entrusts him with the task. Arriving in Japan, Rail rushes to Sarah's high school, leaping between buildings. He uses mind control to clear the sports field, alerting Sarah, Regis, and Rai to a powerful noble's presence. Sensing trouble, Tao, Takio, and M21 hurry to the rooftop, finding Rail, who insults them as humans. Ignoring Regis's inquiry, Rail describes his love for Sarah, revealing a past proposal. Rail violently attacks M21 until Regis and Sarah intervene. Sarah demands Rail leave, who reluctantly agrees, whispering a threat to Sarah before departing. Regis questions the whisper, but M21 collapses from injuries, prompting urgency. Hurrying M21 to Frank, he's placed in a regenerating pod. Regis explains Rail's immense strength as a Kersha pureblood. Regis discloses Rail's motive to take Sarah back to Lucadonia, leading to questions about a past proposal. Sarah reveals Rail proposed years ago, resulting in his confinement for going berserk after rejection. Tao and Takio request experiments from Frank for strength. At night, Sarah calms a worried Regis on the balcony, surprising him with a comforting gesture. She advises him to sleep, sneaking out alone later to meet Rail. Frank seeks Rai's permission to deal with Rail, receiving approval as Rai lifts the seal on his powers. Meanwhile, Rail eagerly awaits Sarah, only to face rejection again. Enraged, he prepares to attack when Frank intervenes. A fierce battle ensues, revealing Rail's sole weapon, Grandia, surprising Sarah. The fight intensifies, and Frank provokes Rail to use his full potential. Rail reveals the Lord's command, forcing Sarah to comply or face treason. Regis pleads to accompany Sarah, but Rail declines, citing the Lord's orders. Taking Sarah to Lucadonia, Rail laughs, revealing Jejidal's dire situation due to his lie. Helpless, Frank and Regis return to the mansion, informing Rai about Sarah and Jejidal. After Rai decides to rescue them, Frank and Regis prepare to go to Lucadonia. Meanwhile, at Raskrea's palace, she anticipates the day she'll confront Rai, seeking revenge for her father's death. Sarah, accompanied by Rail, enters the throne room for questioning. Just then, Raskrea reveals that Jejidal is imprisoned for false reports. Seeking the truth, Raskrea probes Sarah about meeting a suspected noble while blending with humans. Unable to give a clear answer, Raskrea attempts to read Sarah's mind, causing Sarah to shriek in pain. Rail defends Sarah, revealing they only encountered modified humans and a strong blonde human, so Raskrea orders Sarah's confinement for hesitating. Rai, Regis, and Frank board a jet to Lucadonia to aid Sarah and Jejidal. Frank assures Regis about the modified humans' preparedness, and they crash land the jet in Lucadonia's sea, planning to reach Rai's mansion. The clan leaders discover Sarah and Jejidal's arrest and learn of the jet crash. Ludis suggests sending knights to investigate. In Lucadonia, Rai, Regis, and Frank enter a forbidden forest from where Rai's mansion lies nearby. After crash landing, they sense a mysterious aura and find the previous lord's sole weapon, Ragnarok. Regis guards as Rai investigates. Meanwhile, disguised, Regis faces approaching knights, but he is betrayed when his mask falls. However, the modified humans rescue him, revealing they followed him secretly. Rai admits responsibility for Sarah and Jejidal's plight. Rai clarifies he's accused of the previous lord's death, not being a noble. M21 questions Rai's noblest status. Frank explains Rai's unmatched power, surprising Regis and modified humans. Despite rumors, they support Rai. Rai recalls the previous lord predicting Rai's future companions. Rai heads to the sanctuary to meet Raskrea. Knights inform Raskrea of Regis's betrayal, reinforcing her belief in Rai's support. She considers punishing Jejidal with eternal sleep but grants him a chance to explain. Raskrea recalls her past jealousy of Rai, revealed by Jejidal. In the present, she demands Jejidal's allegiance. Jejidal admits meeting Rai in Japan. Raskrea spares him but strips his leadership, preparing for his eternal sleep. Raskrea tasks Rajak and Carius to apprehend Rai's group, blaming Rai for her father's death. Sarah, learning of Jejudal's fate, breaks out of her cell in retaliation. Back to Rai, Regis along with M21 make their way through the forest of Lucadonia towards the Lord's palace, since they had to act as bait for Rai and Frank so that they could reach the palace easily. As Regis and M21 make their way, they get interrupted by Rael, who lands in front of the two of them. Back at the Lord's palace, Sarah makes her way to Jejudal, but she gets interrupted by Rosaria, the leader of the Eleanor clan, who stands in her way. Rosaria, reminding her that she was committing treason, orders her to return back to her cell, but Sarah refuses to do so, and moments later, a battle between them ensues. Meanwhile, after Regis hears that his grandfather, Gedujal, was being forced to eternal sleep, he hurries to save Jejudal as M21 assures him that he can take out Rael. Tao and Takeo, following them from behind, also assure Regis that they were capable of dealing with Rael as they had the T2 pill that Frank handed them. Without a second to waste, Regis hurries to save Sarah and Jejudal, whereas Rael gets pissed off after he starts to bleed, which leads to him losing his mind and making him berserk. Back at the Lord's palace, Sarah unleashes her soul weapon, Death Scythe, to which in response, Rosaria summons her soul weapon, Blood Witch, as they both engage in a fierce battle. From afar, Carias and Rajak notice Regis sprinting towards the Lord's palace. To stop Regis, Carias holds Rajak back and decides that he will be going in to stop Regis. Meanwhile, back at the battle between Rael and the modified humans, in order for Takeo's bullets to hit Rael, Tao tells M21 to lure Rael closer to them. M21, being a master at provocation, provokes Rael to get closer, which Rael does, and eventually falls into a trap Tao and Takeo had set up for him. As Rael stepped closer, Takeo's bullets started to emit high voltage shocks that Tao had planted into Takeo's bullets, which electrocuted Rael, causing him to go even more berserk. As Rael broke free from the trap, Rael summoned his soul weapon, Grandias, in an attempt to eliminate the modified humans once and for all. Witnessing the Grandias summon from afar, Frank starts to worry for the modified humans as he leaves, with the permission of his master, Rai, to protect them from Rael. Meanwhile, Carias catches up with Regis and, as they were on good terms, advises him to leave Lucadonia for the time being. Refusing to show cowardice, Regis stands his ground and tells Carias that he will accompany Jejudal no matter what. Seeing Regis's conviction, Carias challenges Regis to get past him as he tells Regis that if he even grazes him a bit, he will aid him in reaching the Lord's palace. Carias thrashes Regis and suggests he reconsider his decisions. However, Regis rises each time trying to fight back Carias. Back at the fight between Rael and the modified humans, Rael, now with his soul weapon, Grandias, is able to flip the board as he toys with M21 and is able to deflect Takeo and Tao's attacks easily. After toying with M21, Rael prepares to toy with Tao and Takeo, but he is stopped as M21 holds onto his leg and calls him a fake noble. Enraged, Rael is moments away from ending M21's life, but he is interrupted by his brother, Rajak, who appears and warns Rael of Frank, who had also appeared to protect the modified humans. Frank lets them know that Ragar, the previous leader of Kersha, was on equal footing with him. Realizing this, Rajak decides to take him seriously and summons his soul weapon. Likewise, Frank summons his dark spear and clashes against Rajak. Meanwhile, at her father's coffin, Raskrea offers her respects and vows to fight off Rai relentlessly as her father had made the mistake of trusting him. She orders Ludis to bring Jejudal to her and calls Rosaria to her through telepathy. Back at the battlefield, Frank defends himself as Rajak pushes on with his speed. Rajak then forms many duplicates and advances towards Frank, who uses his spear to cut all of the duplicates down. Seeing the modified humans cheering for Frank, Rael throws a slash towards them. Frank stops Rael's slash, only to be taken off guard by Rajak. As a man of honor, Rajak also wounds himself to keep the battle between him and Frank fair. Meanwhile, Regis falls down from bleeding, but Carias holds him. Reminding him to keep his word, Regis lands a light punch on Carias' body, who is proud of his conviction. Back at her palace, Raskrea sentences Sarah to eternal sleep as she had protected Jejudal. Jejudal once again pleads Rai and Sarah's innocence, but Raskrea does not hear him out. Jejudal reminds Raskrea that sentencing Rai would be impossible as Frank, the only powerful human to be acknowledged by the previous lord, was by his side. At the battlefield, Frank exhausts Rajak and then wounds him. Seeing his brother lose, Rael tries to hand his soul weapon to Rajak so he could fuse his own soul weapon with it, but Rajak scolds him instead. Their father, Ragar, had divided his own soul weapon and had given Rajak and Rael each piece, which was against the nobility rules. Hearing Rael wanting to fuse the pieces of the soul weapon, effectively undoing their father's wish, makes Rajak angry at Rael. Meanwhile, at his sentencing, Jejudal continues to point out Raskrea's lack of understanding regarding Frank and Rai's past. As he calls her unfit to be lord, Jejudul informs the present clan leaders of the real reason for Raskrea's hate towards Rai. All of them are shocked to learn from Jejudul about the previous lord's suggestion to make Rai the next lord instead of Raskrea, which stemmed Raskrea's hate for Rai. Moreover, Jejudul points out that Raskrea had made no effort to learn any reasons for Rai's refusal to become the next lord. Bewildered to hear him badmouth the lord, the other clan leaders respectfully ask Jejudul to be silent. Raskrea summons the Ragnarok and heads towards Jejudul to put him in eternal sleep. Suddenly, as Raskrea was about to punish Jejudul and Sarah, Rai appeared from the main entrance in order to save them from their punishments. Approaching Raskrea, Rai is stopped by Ru, the Ru clan leader, as he summons his sole weapon, Garant. K uses his strongest attacks at Rai, but it has no effect on him as Rai, immediately after parrying his attacks, easily lifts him up and throws him away. Rosaria, the leader of the Eleanor clan, quickly follows up by summoning her sole weapon, Blood Witch, which also ends up useless as Rai is easily able to deflect all of her attacks as well. To protect the queen from the deflected projectiles, Ludis Murgas, leader of the Murgas clan, uses his sole weapon, Izanork, to block the incoming attacks. Rosaria, unable to defend herself from her own attacks, falls to the ground as Ludis Murgas takes her place and uses Izanork over Rai to shrink until Rai is squished. Tired by the clan leaders' futile attempts, Rai uses his mind control to force the leaders to fall to the ground due to the sheer power of the mind control. Sarah, surprised by seeing someone other than a lord control the minds of the clan leaders, inquires about Rai's true power. Jejudul reveals that Rai was a noblesse, which meant that he had power surpassing those of lords, and noblesse such as him were appointed to protect as well as punish lords. Witnessing the clan leaders succumb to Rai's mind control, Raskrea enters the battle as she, with her sole weapon, Ragnarok, creates a whirlpool of blood that had an immensely strong aura. Feeling the abnormally strong aura of the lord's weapon, from Frank and his men to the clan leaders, all of them stop fighting and hurry to the lord's palace. Back at the palace, Rai, being the noblesse, is able to parry the strong attack from Raskrea, and he sends her flying to the roof. Rai, upon sensing that she wasn't using her full potential, provokes her to use the blood field, which was an attack only the noblesse and the noble lords could perform. Provoked on using the blood field, Raskrea goes all out, but it all is in vain as Rai, once again, nullifies her strongest attack. Hopeless, Raskrea falls to the ground as she cries over how she lost to him once again since her father, the previous lord, had initially chosen Rai instead of her to become the lord. Seeing Raskrea in such a vulnerable state, the clan leaders stand up once again in order to protect Raskrea and her honor. Rai, seeing their conviction to protect Raskrea, tells them that it was all useless as they would keep on losing to him unless Raskrea does not properly master the blood field. Ignoring Rai's words, they all gang up on Rai, which proves Rai true as they once again get humbled by Rai's OP power. After a while, bored from the fight, Rai decides to use blood field on the clan leaders as he begins to accumulate blood from the ground, causing the air to get dark red. To protect the clan leaders, Raskrea jumps in front of them and uses her blood field to nullify Rai's blood field. After going overboard and using blood field, Rai and Raskrea fall due to exhaustion. To save Rai from hitting himself to the ground, Frank catches Rai whereas Ru grabs onto the falling Raskrea. Along with Frank, Rael, Rajak and the superhumans who were fighting outside the palace enter the palace, and they all witness as Rai uses his hand to summon another Ragnarok. Surprised to see two Ragnaraks present, the other Ragnarok starts to glow, which causes Raskrea's Ragnarok to rise up and project the previous lord's residual thought. The previous lord reveals that he had willingly chosen to end his own life by putting himself to an eternal sleep. Furthermore, he adds that in order to evolve, he had to entrust the future generation with Lucadonia's future, thus he, along with some of the senior clan leaders, willingly ended their own lives. Jejudul, being amongst the ones who stepped up to end his life alongside the lord, was sent back by the previous lord to watch after the future generation. After learning Jejudul's truth, the clan leaders ask about why he hadn't told them the truth. In response, Jejudul reveals that he held back after seeing how young successors were abruptly thrusted into the spotlight to fill in the shoes of their predecessors. Adding on, Jejudul reveals that since every successor was confused due to the sudden role shift, someone took advantage and spread rumors about Rai being a traitor. Embarrassed at not being able to fulfill the previous lord's order, Jejudul requests Raskrea to punish him for not being incapable of telling them the truth. Before Raskrea announced her punishment, Carius throws Regis in front of Jejudul on Regis's request as he requests Raskrea to be punished as well since he belonged to Jejudul's clan. The clan leaders, after seeing Regis's potential, request the Raskrea to not punish him since he had potential to lead the Landegger clan in the coming future. Hearing the thoughts of the clan leaders, Raskrea frees Jejudul and Sarah as she hugs and thanks Jejudul for always being by her side. Shortly after, the previous lord's residual disappears after he apologizes to Raskrea for not letting her know of his death. As the residual disappeared, the two Ragnaroks merge into each other, forming a single strong Ragnarok which Rai hands over to Raskrea since the Ragnarok was made for the noble lords. The next day, after the superhumans healed, Frank gets the permission from Raskrea to take Regis and Sarah back to Japan along with them. Meanwhile, Rai outside the Lord's palace meets up with Raskrea, who asks him about how his father was. Rai, having good memories with his father, tells her that his father was always proud of her, which cracks up Raskrea as she laughs in happiness. After a while, Rai, along with Frank, Regis, Sarah, and the superhumans, leave Lucadonia to head back to Japan. Upon reaching Japan, everybody's routine returns back to normal as Toshiro and Manabu meet up with all of them, making them realize how good their lives had gotten during their time in Japan with humans. Thanks for watching.